All right, so before we go to our guest, let's talk about that clip. Gentlemen, you guys have some experience out there back in the day in the dating sphere. Did it was it so tough back then, or is it a different terrain today? What has changed from your observations of those samples of culture?
I did not have cell phones back in the day when I was bartending, and I think that was extremely helpful back in the 90s, mid 90s, oh, well, 95 to 2002 era. Best to not have memories of that. I think it feels like a real antisocial turn. Uh, it feels like a lot of the women have got it in their heads that masculinity is toxic. I wonder where they got that idea from. And then on the
Social
receiving
media.
end,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry, you were
of
being
course, yeah.
rhetorical.
On the and then on the receiving end, as a guy, I mean, there's only so much criticism you're willing to take before you just say, you know what, I think I'm going to go play video games with my friends. And like not and skip the socializing tonight out with the ladies, like if it's just going to be this much of a headache. And I think the demographic numbers are starting to show that, definitely in places like Japan, but even in America, there's nobody's getting married. I mean, that whole window of we get married and start to have a family, that when it was 25, now it's not even happening before 30. So everything has been pushed out. In a way, everybody's been sort of pitted against each other, and in a way that feels very unnatural, and very engineered.
I think it's worth noting though that it's kind of a caricature,
Oh, look
right?
at that.
Like what was shown right there. Like I think his. I mean, he's funny. He does things that are kind of. It's kind of like that. Democrats are like this, Republicans are like that kind of humor, which can be funny, but it's very caricature and very divide and conquer. And the point though. I definitely agree. I think we all noticed that there's been a massive shift in regard to the way politics have bled into just everyday life. And I think that's an example of that. Today we're seeing the woke right in a similar way, but the woke left is what's largely responsible right there. But in my experience, I don't think it's as prominent as the kind of caricature left-right politics scene makes it seem in front of me. When I go out and talk to people, women or men, about the situation, in the context of what they deal with when they're dating women, it just doesn't feel like that's the reality. You'll come across the weird people like that. But in general, I feel like everyone is tired of that. You know what I mean? And so I think it's worth considering whether that is not the reality and we're all being played by the kind of veneer that's been put over it by the way we're supposed to think by the left-right paradigm. I don't know. I just think that I don't feel like that's as accurate as that he makes that seem, but it is funny.
Tonight's guest is a world-class chef who's going to help us understand the best way to slice a green pepper. Hold on, wait. Part of that's true. He is a chef, but instead of like kitchen prep, best pro tips, we're going to get learnified on a variety of geopolitical topics, like he just did right there. He's going to share his wisdom profusely, as he usually does over there at thelastamericanvagabond.com, and he's over on X. We're going to show you the page later. I'm pleased to welcome back to Grand Theft World the dogged tenacity and unlimited parrhesia of Ryan Cristian. I had to give you an intro, bro. I can't just have you coming in. We got to be
It's
classy here.
Was I not supposed to jump in right there? It's
No,
funny.
you're fine. You're good,
The
dude.
last time I came on the show, I was in the background for the longest time, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know I was supposed to jump in." So I figured I'm just going to jump in this
You're
time.
perfect.
How
You're
you doing?
perfect. I like your jacket, man.
Thank you. Thank
You
you.
got good style. You must have air conditioning in your studio.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. The other day I came out here and it's like a mini split, and it was just turned down, kind of, I guess, high. So it was like 70 something. And I came out rushing out for a show and I just could not get my body temperature down. It was terrible. I had to take my coat off. So it's yes and no.
Do you have best tips when you get hot on camera or in a meeting? I'll share mine if you share yours. I got some good tips.
I don't in the middle of a meeting, but one thing I think it was a teacher at one point, like a science teacher, told me that and it does work, if you put your wrists or your like vein, your large veins under cold water, it works really fast. It drops your body temperature like a couple degrees, like really quickly, at least in my
I
experience.
I think you could also hold ice in your mouth, but that's not always appropriate during a meeting.
Yeah.
I used to back when I did sales pitch meetings in New York. You got to be like you had a big suitcase. It's like your projector, and you had a laptop that wasn't such a laptop, and it's hot, and you're in the subway, and you're in a suit. So I used to put some antiperspirant on my forehead, right? So I'm not like profusely sweating from my forehead in a meeting. And every now and then, if it was really hot, you got two options. You can stuff a paper towel in your shirt, You kind of catch some of that. Or if I got hot and I was bleeding through my shirt, I just wouldn't take my jacket off because I
Mm.
would never go all the way through the jacket. But it's like the never let them see you sweat. That's a true thing. And if you are like just got to the meeting and it's going to be a scene, it's going to distract from your entire presentation because unfortunately, people judge you on how you look until they get to know you for the quality of your character. And so you do need to present yourself in a certain way to public if you expect people to have a genuine reaction to you and not something that they're uh repelled by.
Mm.
That's the gist. That's the gist.
I,
So
I get the I get the center of the back of my head that now that I'm going balder as I get older, you know, even though it happened when I was like 30, but right in the middle right here, I sweat, which is the weirdest thing. I'm sure Charlie knows what I'm talking
ah,
about.
You've outed my baldness. Yes, as a matter of fact, I do know what you're talking about.
I actually don't even know if you just shave like I do or not. I can't tell, but I was just kidding.
I just shit. It was a losing battle. You know, it was one of those things. Back in my bartending days. Speaking of that, I had long like surfer hair. You know,
No
and
way.
I kinda, oh yeah, and I kind of knew like subconsciously like enjoy it while you can, buddy, because it's gonna be going away at some point here, probably sooner
funny.
than you like. So I gave up the fight and I just caved and shave it now.
I had a kid when I was in weirdly enough, Bill Cartwright basketball camp. If you can remember, that's just a
I
throwback
remember
name, isn't
Bill
it?
Cartwright. Yeah, of course.
My dad was a basketball coach and football his whole life, and so he used to go coach there, and so I went there like a couple years in a row. But I remember a kid sitting above me on like the bunk beds, looking down at my head. I mean, I was young, like I don't know, I can't remember now, 10 maybe, younger, and he was looking at the top of my head. He's like, "You're gonna go bald when you get old." He said that. He's like, "You have thin hair," and I was like, "Shut up, that's not true." Sure enough.
well, growing up with a dad who's a coach, you had to learn a lot about sportsmanship and work
Mm.
ethic and the other things that enable a coach to do their things. So what were some of your early like built-in skill sets that helped you translate to what you do today, which is independent, off the beaten path, anti-fragile, right? It takes a lot of courage and bravery to do what you do. How was that seeded back then through like just learning about sports and teamwork and, practicing and things like that?
Well, I mean, the obvious points of what you learn in organized sports in general, which I mean, as a person who's run and managed and run businesses, it's one of the very first things I always ask is like, do you ever play organized sports? Not that it's a make or break, but it tells you something about they've learned teamwork and learned how to work with other people and how to all the different things you learn in team sports. But that's one part of it. My dad was always very adamant about just that kind of mindset, but it was more so, and my mother's in the same way. Interestingly, as a teacher, which I find very rare in my experience with teachers, he was very adamant about, questioning the information. Like even in a book, you're like in a, most teachers wouldn't do that. You read a textbook and you go, no, that's the real. But he asked me, what do you think about that? Does that make sense to you? And it's an early age. It was sort of like, it's okay to question these things, even if that's what's being said in a, respectable manner, right? He didn't tell me to yell at the teacher, but it was like, it's okay to engage and it's okay to question these things. And I just, as we all know, growing up, I mean, that's super rare, and I got the same kind of thing from my mother's side, and so that's where probably question everything comes from, and plenty of other things.
All right. So for someone in the audience that's never played team sports, because I understand what you're saying, but for someone that's never played a team sport, what are they missing out on by not having that dynamic in their experiential background?
Well, I mean, obvious, like I said, there's something about learning, not just like teamwork in general. It's learning how to work with people, learning how to work alongside somebody maybe you don't like. That same thing with like business and in restaurants, especially. It's like you got to learn how to accept sometimes that it's not going to be somebody you want to be next to. But I think it's really just about that kind of unit team dynamic, and it's about the camaraderie. It's about like many of the coaches I had growing up. It was, in a very, again, I don't want to say uncommon. I think a lot of coaches are like this, but there's plenty that aren't. It's about almost more than the sport. It's about teaching you how to be a man, how to act with courage and honor and integrity, and and show that outside of the sport as well. And there's a lot of different things. And I think we all have different experiences with sports, but I think that's the primary ideas is just learning those team aspects of what it shows you, and doing it in an honorable way, and common goals. those kind of things. Like, it's all, I mean, teamwork is the major part of it, obviously, but I think it teaches you something about who you are as a person, and I really do think that people that grow up, not that it makes you any lesser of a person, but when you go through that and you learn those things, it just kind of changes the way you look at things. And I think that we're in a restaurant, for very clearly, that's one of the main places I would ask that. You're going to have to work along all these people. You're going to have to work towards a common goal, beat the rush in one obvious point. And I like people that can do that, and have shown they can in the past. But, I think it's different for everybody.
Well, and I think there's also, you learn how to set your personal needs aside and play as a team. Because when I started playing football in third grade, I was going to be a quarterback. The coach said, "No, you're a tackle." Defense or offense, you're a tackle. And 10 years later, I was a quarterback, but like, you don't start out where you want to be. You have to earn it. You have to earn the respect of your coach and your fellow teammates. And you also, part of earning that respect, because I know that for people that don't know how to do that, that sounds nebulous. The experience of working on a team gives you the anticipatory skills, like to anticipate what is needed next by somebody else. And that
Yeah,
is
good
important
point.
in a business, in a kitchen, in a family, in a community. You cover each other's zones when they're out of position. All these little nuances that translate into real life, those are some of the things that some people have missed out on, but you can still get into that. You don't have to even play a sport. You can like look at your
Right.
work in the kitchen at the restaurant as a sport. It's a team sport. We're trying to serve the people in the dining room. Let's work together and like communicate clearly, and make sure things are prepared, all those good things. But I was just trying to show like those early seeds sprout up to like the adult responsibilities that we shoulder.
And I would to add that it's much, like you just showed with the kitchens, but there's plenty of other examples where you can learn those things. And I think in general, it's just, we all look at those as positive traits, like you said, is actually really important. Like, not just doing it when asked, but recognizing somebody may need support and doing it because it helps everybody achieve that goal, as opposed to just focusing on what's your responsibility and going, screw them, I'm going to let them fail. And that's a life lesson for a lot of different things, even what we do in this field.
Well, no, I was translating it to that because I do see those people, and it's like, okay, they're not. I don't know. It's not that they're not team players; they just don't have that experience to be useful in the field to other people playing the game of freedom versus the people who prefer tyranny. Right? It's a freedom
Yep.
versus slavery type of paradigm, and there's people caught in the middle who don't know which way to move. But when there's something going on, and you're like, I'm not going to help those other people. I'm going to make it harder on them or do some unnecessary drama. Like that's I don't know. Those people just lack experience, and I have hope and optimism for them.
Yeah, good way to put that. Definitely. Don't give up. I think it's just something that people have to learn and those experiences along the way and recognize that it benefits them to do that. Not just for freedom, but anything, life.
Well, also, sometimes you need to get a good coach around you who can see where you're best suited. And I had an experience with this in high school with a soccer coach who moved me from left wing, a forward position, to center fullback. And he said, your mindset is more defensive. You're the last line of defense. You're not an aggressive person. You're not a bully. You're not a shit starter. You're the guy that comes in and cleans it up at the very end. You have to be the last line of defense. You have to think like that. And he would take me and walk me around the field before the game and talk to me about the guy I would be covering. I remember one time the guy I was going to be covering was warming up and he'd taken his jersey off. He was running around without his shirt off. And this coach knew how to get me, and he said, I want you to look at your guy out there. He fancies himself a great deal. Wouldn't you agree? Was what he said. He's a British guy. And I was like, yeah, he does fancy himself a great deal. God, I didn't think of that. He started getting in my head. He said, I want you to establish yourself early on in the game with him, with a guy like that, and by the time the game started, I was ready to murder this guy. I was just out, and that was all from a coach that just said, this is misfitting. Where the position that you've been in your entire life is not actually a good fit for you. And so he made me a better player just by moving me. And I thought that was genius. And he saw something that I didn't see, that I had never even considered. And so sometimes you need that external perspective that says, no, 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 I can see this in a way that you can't. This and this and this need to change. And then you do that and boom, everything works. And whether that's on a soccer field or whether that's in a kitchen or that's in a business, sometimes you just need to move those pieces around till you get the right fit, and then everything magically takes off.
What about you, Scott? You got experiences to share on this? You've been quiet.
I mean, yeah, I played sports growing up. My dad coached my little league team. That was good. I don't know. I played football. I was a tackle also until I discovered drugs and alcohol. And then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this instead. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I don't know.
Wha- One of the things that we also did, Richard, back in the early 2000s, I'm a co-owner of a media training company for pro athletes. Right? We would take guys and get them ready for interviews with coaches, scouts, general managers, get them ready for the media, get them ready for a life in broadcasting and things like that. So, and where we were focusing, where we wound up, I opened up a branch of our company at the what used to be the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy in Bradenton, Florida. Now it's known as IMG Academies. And so I went and opened up the communication division of this big school. And what we noticed was that, and what's funny is that my business partner and I had gone to school, high school together. We had played football together. We'd played baseball together. We knew each other really well, and we come out of this team sport. And what we found was that a lot of the people we were working with were golfers and tennis players, which is a very individual sport. And that's a whole different mindset. And no offense to golfers and tennis players, but when you get to the pro level, like the guys we were working with, guys and girls we were working with, it's a very lonely, unusual, isolating, strange place. And you have no diffused responsibility either when you're in golf or a tennis player. It's you. For better or for worse, I suppose, you get all the glory too, but if anything goes wrong, it's all you. So in team sports, part of the lessons you learn is the share of responsibility, both, positive and negative. And in these individual sports, we found that the people that we were interacting with were a little bit socially retarded as well. They didn't have that interaction of the ball busting that goes on between guys in the locker room and the things like that, where you have this camaraderie. And also,
Well, they're uber
typically,
competitive. They're always against other individuals to hold their position, as
yes,
opposed to a team having to gel. And my point is, if you guys in the audience don't get the metaphor, this goes on in the freedom movement. There are people who know how to play their position and be a team player, and there's people who are like, I'm competing with you and stop, trying to copy or steal and all these other things, that go on. It's like, I think the more people that know about Jeffrey Epstein, the better, but I don't necessarily think that Sauger and Jetty and the other people giving PowerPoint presentations on big platforms with millions of people are the best people or the most learned or researched people on the topic, right? So there's like these types of things that go on. And I know this plays into Ryan because he does a lot of coverage of things that then get like, they show up other places and he doesn't necessarily get the credit, but he's at the top of the mountain. And there's a trickle down to places with larger audiences. And I just wish more people would come out and play on the team freedom and support endeavors like yours, because it's really hard when you're an individual who does play as a teammate. You play very fair on the field, bro. You know what I'm saying? And you play your position well. And I want to see people in your position get more support. But there's also other people out there that are like territorial and like, I don't know, maybe they just need a good dose of psilocybin. And they
Well,
chill out. I don't know.
an interesting overlap though is that so the analogy is so perfect for this, right? Because clearly there are people with, like, let's just say on, like, I guess all of it too, but independent media, like you're saying, that are just, they're all in this, like, even if they're actually in it for the truth as their primary goal, they don't want it to be anybody else that gets there, like you're saying, right? They would almost hurt the truth to make sure they were the only ones that did it, and and so on, which is a different thing than what I call team sport politics, which is interesting, right? But it's the same kind of analogy in reverse, but in the bad way, where what I'm talking about when I say that are people that are willing to root for the outcome, whether right or not, because their team wants that outcome, right? So it's the same kind of an idea where, like the analogy I use is when you're watching a football game and your guy didn't make it in, his knee went down, but you're like, come on, ref, give him the touchdown, even though it didn't happen. That's every day in team sport politics, where they're like, we don't care if Trump's on the list. just hide it. You know, like if he wins, then we're winning. And, you know, it's just so it's both those things. It's very important to think about. But I like the way you framed that was really interesting because we all see that, right? But it's interesting to think of it like a trickle down idea, but in a way that does seem to be what it is, you know, and it's interesting. And it's not like those things don't have impact. Like the argument you always get, like let's say Tucker does a big show on something, is that, well, isn't it good that he's talking about it? Well, yes. I don't think any of us would disagree that at least there's some positive to that random person who's never heard this before getting some of that truth. The problem, though, is in my mind, it's always about when it's beyond, like when it's a point at which they know it's inevitable. Everyone's eventually going to see that truth. So then they use that truth to sort of stave off the momentum, but then also get you to think that this person's the one that's going to guide you there when they just kind of trapped you into circling you back into the problem, if that makes sense. You know, and I know you guys all understand that. For those listening, it's just like this constant daily issue where there are people out there that are just trying to sort of like redirect your information back into the same kind of partisan control structure. And it's just constant.
Well, I mean, I would consider you and Corbett and Whitney among the greatest historians of our time. But you're
Wow.
not.
Well, thank
but
you
you're not
very
on
much for
Tucker
saying
getting recognized as that. Like they would never. Like they want to talk about Epstein through the lens of Saga and Jetty, not through Whitney Webb. They want to talk about Israel through the lens of Daryl's podcast, not Ryan's podcast. For instance, you know, it's not like no one knows you're out there. They knew you were out there to ban you all those years ago and give you all that trouble, right? So the establishment knows about you, but it's almost like instead of having a Ryan Cristian on a Joe Rogan podcast, let's have somebody who's more, well, like there's no amorphous edges. There's no uniqueness. They'll just cookie cut or something and be like, here's a counterfeit kind of perspective that cuts off a lot of interesting evidence purposefully to occlude it from your freedom, your choice.
Right.
And so like people don't get the difference between to use a dough metaphor, right? When you roll out some dough, you make a little dough ball, you roll it out, it's an amorphous shape. And then you use a cookie cutter to make something that's uniform. The schooling is the cookie cutter, and the amorphous shape is what really is part of us that would challenge the system. So they have to cut that off, right? They're doing the same thing by kind of having like 75 percenters instead of the people who are 100%. They're having C students go out there and represent it instead of the A+ students.
Right.
That's my observation.
Definitely. First off, just thank you for saying that. But I just have to say that people like James Corbett somebody I strive to be like, and Whitney, you know, a category of her own. I'm sure we all agree with that. But thank you for saying that. It means a lot to me. But an interesting overlap to that is somebody like well, I mean, I could name like, let's just say like an Ian Carroll. It's an interesting example to kind of throw in. Not that we have to get into individuals, but I think today we're in this field where, again, everything you just said, I exactly agree with, but we're in this like new level of it where I think there's I would even argue maybe the majority, if that, you know, is possible, of people out there that don't know they're being used, don't know that they're in fact playing that, don't know that they are the cookie cutter. You know what I mean? Like, and yet it's like these people that kind of step into this, they get funding out of nowhere and, you know, it's all going their way. And, you know, and all of a sudden they start getting kind of audience captured. And, you know, and the point is that most people in that position, they're not going to rock the boat. You know, they recognize the boundaries and, you know, and it's like willful ignorance and it's so constant, you know. And so my point in saying that is that there are people out there that may even have good intentions, like genuinely think they're doing the right work, but are being corralled by the funding, by the team, by the, you know, and it's like, I really do think, and that's not meant to give anybody a pass. The reason I point to someone like Ian is it's like, I question that. I wonder, is he somebody who knows that there's been clear examples, in my opinion, where it's been like some corralling. You know, like that one weird anomaly with like the RFK blackmail point where it's just a whole very weird way that went down. And you just wonder, you know, is that something, because other times there's good work that does seem to break things down in a good way. And, you know, it's just interesting. And so it's worth considering that. The point would be, I guess, don't always assume that everyone is intentionally trying to deceive, but question them all nonetheless, you know?
Yeah, I would go with incompetence or like nescience or ignorance before saying it's criminal or intentional. However, like as an example, Candace Owens likes to talk about Epstein. She's doing a whole Epstein Files series, and yet she doesn't have the 2 volumes, you know, set by Whitney Webb, One Nation Under Blackmail. Really, it's One World Under Blackmail, but that's probably her next set. So you've got Candace, and she's a busy lady. You know, she's a busy lady, and she didn't have time to read the 2-volume set on the topic she likes to talk about all the time. Instead, she talks about the Chaos MK Ultra book about Manson. So she doesn't read it. And that's a shame because the world could use some more Epstein knowledge from One Nation Under Blackmail. But Ian Carroll Well, he's coming on to host a show while Candace is out having a baby. Surely he, who talks about Whitney's work all over the place, will have her on, Candace, and introduce her work to millions of people who could get a granular understanding and then dismiss all this other noise and get to the actual signal. But that did not happen. And maybe it didn't occur to him. Maybe Candace said, do not have Whitney Webb on, do not read these books. I don't know. But I just can't help but notice. There's been a lot of noticing lately. It's noticing season. These things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's interesting, you know, that it's, I mean, it's obvious, right? I mean, you're right. He has mentioned it many times. I mean, even Joe Rogan has referenced more than once her work, and yet this never seems, you know, I think there are people that are like, thou shalt not pass, right? There's a very clear, and I don't necessarily think like it's what we're talking about, like they're knowingly sort of, but there are, I guess the way, like the string pullers, you know, and just a broad concept, people that are funding high level interests, you know, business interests, government elements, you know, that just sort of like set these parameters. I mean, today we're dealing with this AI algorithmic control more than ever, as it, you know, probably way beyond that. And so it's like, I think that there's just like blocks and people get channeled away from certain people like Whitney in particular, or James Corbett. I make this point all the time. Everybody in this field that I talk to, at the very least, is very aware of James Corbett's work. And it almost always is like a foundational background point to what they're getting to. But it seems that very few people outside of like, you know, the very people we're just like very few people in the largest elements of this ever mention him, ever point to him, ever interview him. And it just, how does that possibly make sense when you can look through their notes? You're like, well, you clearly read his work. It's right there. You know, it just doesn't, it shows me that there's something guiding them away from that. And I, you know, I don't know what exactly that is. I think it's like we defined just now. It's a multifaceted sort of engineered, you know, box out, if you will.
Going back to the thing we talked about 5 minutes ago, where the spitefulness and like they want their team to win, even if they didn't win legitimately. It's just like King Solomon making a decision with the two moms and the baby, and everyone's like, "Cut it in half. We don't care," right? And it's that's part of it. But the other part was these people who are like they have boundaries that we're talking about that they won't touch the third rail. It's like an electric fence that controls their narratives. Like Mike Benz will talk about stuff to a point, but then he stops, right? And any number of these people, like Sauger and Jetty, will talk about it to a point, and then it stops. And it's almost like it stops when you start talking about international, supranational, globalist, concerted efforts, because that's outside their narrative, because they still think of it as conspiracy theory, even though it's the thing that resolves all the contradictions.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, probably plenty of them right in that exact category, but we all can probably see that there's 1,000 ways that you could, like, they're not missing what they're brushing up against, especially with a globally acknowledged multi-nation greater Israel genocide taking place. That's where I would see it obviously connecting to a lot of, you know, areas that are just not allowed to be touched on. And I think that, you know, it's very clear, like just taking that topic in and of itself and looking at like, so anybody honest out there who genuinely looks into the information, and I mean like source material to the highest degree, whatever you think that, like, multifaceted, human rights groups, UN, like everything in the history showing you that what we're now finding out has always been obvious almost, like on surface level, but yet for some weird reason, whether it's because of the structure won't letting it happen or just people didn't see it, people just didn't seem to be aware of what's been going on for 77, you know, however, you know, 77 plus years, some more than that if you get into other topics. But what's interesting is that it shows you those avenue. Like there was something that very carefully corralled us away for a very long time. If you got too close, you were shouted at, you know, you're an anti-Semite, you're racist. And for some reason today, it's just kind of breaking away, you know? And it's like that, I don't know. It's, you know, it's funny. Charlie, and you brought this up twice now, that black hole analogy is such a perfect way to look at that, right? Go ahead. You want to say that?
Yeah, I described the way the astronomers account for black holes, since you can't see one, right? You don't go looking for something that you can't see. Instead, what you do is you look for abnormalities and unusual movements of stars. And if you see a star that's acting in an unnatural manner, you can deduct that there's something influencing it that you can't see. And that's Israel, is the black hole. It's, you can't see it, but you know it's there because you see somebody whose normal behavior is his behavior is abnormal, and you know that there's an undue influence. I wonder why Kash Patel and Bongino changed their stories and look like they saw a ghost, because there's an unseen influence. So can you prove that it's there? Yes, I guess, but do you have to? You know it's there because you can sense its influence on people with cameras in their faces and microphones in front of their mouths who are saying and doing things that are incompatible with logic and reason. And you go, what's happening here? Well, it's the black hole that is exerting its influence and making things happen, or making certain things get ignored, or making certain people look like they've seen ghosts. So that was what Ryan and I had talked about in the past, is that sometimes it don't expect to go to see it. Just know that you'll know its influence when you recognize that. You'll see, and it'll be hallmarked by just people saying and doing things that are incompatible with reality.
And just a bigger point too. Sorry, real quick, is just that it's, you know, it's not just, it's about anything, right? It's about an unseen influence, and instead of, you know, trying to figure, you know, you could always try to find out what it was, but just noticing that there is an influence by the many different things being manipulated around it. And it's just such an interesting analogy to see applying to, you know, Israel, or applying to just, you know, intelligence, government stuff. I mean, it's just an really interesting way to think about it, because it really does explain a lot of what we're seeing. I love that analogy.
Well, I have an example of a black hole being described as a quote. Now, it has nothing to do with Israel, because Israel didn't exist when this quote was written. So it can't have anything to do with that type of undue influence, invisible influence. So I'm just polishing my glasses here. Let's go over here to this camera so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to this book right here. So I'm going to hit that button. So far, so good. Ryan, are you familiar with The New Freedom by Dr. Woodrow Wilson?
I don't believe so.
Oh, dude, you're going to like this. And if you're watching this show and you know what I'm going to do, you watch this show too much. That's all.
What year is that book written?
Oh, this is a first edition from 1913, published in London by Chapman and Hall. And these are the campaign speeches of Woodrow Wilson. Okay. You need only go in 12 pages to this quote. And I'm going to zoom in without spilling my drink this time, because you guys saw that last week. That's old news, spilling the drink. And I'll try to read. I'm going to read from the screen so I can see it better. All right, so we're starting here with the magic bouncing ball. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere, so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. They know that America is not a place of which it can be said, as it used to be, that a man may choose his own calling and pursue it just as far as his abilities enable him to pursue it. Because today, if he enters certain fields, there are organizations which will use means against him that will prevent him from building up a business which they do not want to have built up. Organizations that will see to it that the ground is cut from under him and the markets shut against him. If he begins to sell certain retail dealers, sell to certain retailers, the monopoly will refuse to sell to those dealers. He calls it a monopoly. And those dealers will be afraid and will not buy the new man's wares. And this is, so anyway, this quote goes on for 8 pages. It is the under the old order changeth. And it is very illustrative of all the things we were just talking about among our own coterie of independent people, right? Have we not all tried to raise up businesses that are, the business is freedom, not earning, you know, profit like the corporate stock market wants us to have? Our goals are a little more enlightened, and they do not want such things being rewarded, which is why you would see some counterfeit cookie cutter type things being passed around the market so that no one ever gets a taste of Ryan Cristian or James Corbett or Whitney Webb or Derek Bros or any number of our colleagues, Jason Burmis, any number of our colleagues who have always made it about truth versus the fiction and freedom over slavery, you know? And I think that we're among the people who, we are people of the highest virtue because we have withstood the highest bidders. You know, we've resisted the highest bidders and chosen to make our own way. And that has to have seeds. Otherwise, everyone would be doing it, right? So people in our audience can learn to do and be likewise. And some of them have those seeds of growth within them. but I'm always just trying to figure out like what makes Ryan Christian different than any number of other people who might care about these topics, but they're scared of what will people call me if I speak the truth.
Well, for I'm sorry. Did you lose me? Did I blink out right there?
No, you're good.
Oh,
You're
okay.
good.
Before we go, I'll answer that. But what do you think they're discussing in that book? Well, I mean, let me answer your question first, since I'll forget it. But I think the difference is just determination. You know what I mean? Like just. I mean, we all know there's consequences for this. I mean, we're dealing with those, right? I mean, most of us here have dealt with some pretty ridiculous consequences. I just think it's, you must make a choice in your life. What matters to you? And for me, it's not even about like, I mean, the truth is obviously important. The outcome is important. But for me, it's about the principle of it. I believe in these things, and I believe that we can do this in a better way. And I believe that it matters how you live your life, every moment and every action, the sum of choice is kind of an idea. And I just think that, I wouldn't be okay. I wouldn't be happy with myself. I wouldn't be okay living a life that I didn't believe I was doing what I could. Like, I mean, honestly, especially right now, just taking the one topic of the genocide, it kills me every single day we talk about this, that it just seems like, it's just uphill battle of just even getting people to talk about this. And I mean, there's a lot of people talking about it, but I mean, in the places of power that can stop it. And so I couldn't live with myself if I didn't know that I was doing what I could to try to show people what's happening and try to change that, regardless of the consequences. That's the reality of it. But I'm sure we all have different motivations,
I think what Woodrow Wilson was pointing out was an international, supranational group of business conglomerate, robber baron type of enterprises that have squashed the individual's ability to be upwardly mobile in society, and pointing out that American prosperity in that time was already on the wane because of these types of things. And so by him making these speeches, it's a very clever move, because Woodrow Wilson making these speeches got the attention of the guys who brought in the Federal Reserve. And they said, that's our guy. Let's go buy him. Okay. Now, he brings in the Federal Reserve. He's one of the worst presidents we've ever had. Let's go fast forward to Harry S. Truman, who wrote a scathing critique of the Rockefellers and their Standard Oil working with the Nazis in World War II. And all of a sudden, they're like, you're our guy. You're going to be president. Nixon also found out that Rockefeller and Dulles had helped to fund the Nazis. He went to them to bust them. And they're like, why don't we make you vice president under Eisenhower, our guy? So, yeah, oftentimes those people write it not because they're going to hold to that perspective. They're saying that to get the check, which is different.
Or like an Orwell, Huxley idea, where it's like, were they really trying to inform you, or is this more of a, predictive programming, or any number of things? It's always it's interesting to think about, though. It's a dangerous move, but by kind of showing them that you see the game, maybe you can jump up the ladder a little bit. I mean, that's the problem with this, is that so many people in higher level echelon media, politics, anything, they're influenced for the wrong reasons. It's like, that's why people gravitate towards those power positions, because, I think you might even be the one that told me this at one point, but the idea that like sociopaths ultimately strive for those power positions because they know what they would do to people if they were in that position, and so it's like this constant battle to get ahead so you're not the one suffering. It's just sad, but that's why I genuinely think that they're the minority. Whether it's statistics, science, or just, what we're seeing in the world. And I think that that's what we need to start recognizing. Like, that's the whole idea of, all the different metaphors and ideas about, if we just can, I just played actually a clip about that 3.5% discussion. Have you seen that? And it's really interesting about like a protest, but even like a countrywide dynamic. If we can just get a certain percentage consistently standing up and you could change things. At least that's what the information shows.
Yeah, wasn't it Margaret Mead who said, never doubt that a small number of people, because like she was part of that small number of eugenicists helping Hitler.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a good example of why the person who says it, whether true or not, in a context matter, doesn't mean you endorse everything they ever say. But it's one of my favorite quotes, because the idea I really do think resonates is that, what is it? Never forget that dedicated individuals can change the world, or something like that, that right. Indeed it's the only thing it ever has. And I just think that matters. And it doesn't mean that you alone out there being dedicated can suddenly change it, but you may initiate thought in somebody that then has a child that does, or whatever. Maybe that your things starts a movement, and then people do it, and it still started with you being dedicated to the outcome and to the principle. I think it's important. But you always get that when people go, "Oh, you support her." It's like, did I say that? I'm talking about the quote. Anybody could have said it. It's the point of it.
It's good to have fun with Margaret Mead. She's got a lot of good quotes out there.
She does.
I would like to watch a clip while you're here. Now you have a choice. We don't always, I made this up. We don't always give a choice because I just made this part up. But I have Mouse Utopia with Flagrant. They're discussing it, which I thought is very unflagrant of them to speak about Calhoun's Mouse Utopia. Or since you just mentioned Orwell, there was a clip that came off Tucker this week that was talking about the Orwellian society. So which would you like us to watch while you're here with us?
I don't think I've seen a Tucker clip. Let's watch that.
All right, Colby, you heard the man. Let's go to Tucker, and then we're going to come back and comment afterwards.
Prophetic isn't the word. Prophetic is overused. It's not that he predicts the society we live in today. He finds the eternal formulas by which power defeats the human mind and individual. It wasn't that he was just extrapolating about historical trends.
Yes.
He was giving us a worst case scenario for groupthink over person think. He was giving us a warning about what happens when we lose our memories. More than anything else, 1984 is a book about time, about a society which doesn't have access to the past, in which the past is constantly rewritten to celebrate the current leaders.
So it's Wikipedia.
Yeah, kind of, yes. And in which there is no future because no one can plan a life. No one can even expect that they won't go to jail tomorrow for some tiny crime or offense. People in 1984 are stuck brutally and tragically in the present. And the thing that keeps the present their sole preoccupation is the violence of society. You know, the thing about violence is it happens now. It takes you out of the past. It blots out the future. Violence is a deep experience of the present only, from which you can't escape. And in 1984, the reason they have a 2-minute hate where the society gathers every day to throw oranges and, you know, hurl curses at this imaginary enemy, subversive, Goldstein. And the reason they have an actual hate week in the summer every year where they do that for a week is that fear, anger, and violence are ultimately the weapons of the control class. And he does a very good job of showing how eternal and perpetual war with unseen enemies abroad keeps the people in their place and keeps them insecure and anxious. He does another good job of showing how constant fear in the domestic realm, will I be told on, will I be turned in? You remember in 1984, there's a telescreen that watches you, you don't watch it. Will I be seen to have some, item I shouldn't have? I'm supposed to have black market cigarettes, but somehow I found some good ones. Will they see those and come to my house and take them, take me? And so the book is a nightmare, and it's a thorough nightmare, which seems to offer no hope at all. At the end, it's not any spoiler to say the hero who manages for a short time to think for himself, to have a love affair, to write a diary. His great crime in the book is starting a diary. Pens and paper are pretty much illegal in the world because they create a record that can't be falsified, And so at the end, he's completely crushed. He's tortured. He's brainwashed. And he comes out at the end a thoroughly broken person, saying slogans, I love Big Brother, without spirit, without hope. It is a hopeless portrait of what happens when an inner circle of people devoted to power above all take control of the human mind and the individual. And if you want to depress yourself, read 1984. That it resembles in so many ways things that are happening now is uncanny, but I guess someone used it as a template at some point. I mean, you would almost think they did. In so many ways, our censorship regime, our surveillance regime, in the book, the young people are the enemies of the old. They're spying on them constantly. Children are the most distrustful and zealous backers of party orthodoxy.
They're especially young women.
And young women in particular. And Orwell has been criticized for that, thus the misogyny.
Because it bears no resemblance to our current reality whatsoever. I mean, he just made it up out of nothing.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, we have, when I read it as a child, the reason they assigned 1984 was to tell us that there's this place called the Soviet Union that is much like this. And by reading 1984, you can celebrate your freedom to read 1984.
Exactly.
Which they can't do over there. You can celebrate the superiority of our culture and our, value for the individual and our freedom to think, express ourselves without fear. But when you read 1984 now, it's not to feel superior to the old Soviet Union or, Hitler's Germany. It's to realize we're there. We're so there that in some ways Orwell lacked imagination. He didn't know AI, though. When in the world of 1984, novels are written by machines. They just take the elements of novels and, like a kaleidoscope, they crank a wheel and new combinations come out. Which is very much like the AI literature I've been predicting.
In 1984. Machines write novels.
Yes.
I don't know how I forgot that.
Winston's girlfriend, Julia, is in the novel writing department. And it's a funny book. At one point, she gets injured operating the novel writing machine. And he said, but it was a common injury in the novel writing department.
She got her fingers caught in a novel writing machine?
Yeah.
So you walk into my garage, my actual garage. One of the first things you see is a Liberty safe.
One thing he gets wrong is that 1984, the society called Oceania, Airstrip 1 is the new name for England. It's allied with America in an alliance against Eurasia, which is basically Russia and Eastern Europe, and East Asia, which is basically China. And they're perpetually at war with each other. And the war and the sides change constantly. One of the greatest black humor scenes in all of literature is Winston Smith in Trafalgar Square, some London square, during a big demonstration against the enemy, Eurasia, and there are posters up of the Eurasian, evil leaders and their atrocities and so on. And in the middle of the protest, the word comes down from Big Brother, from the party, from the government, that we're no longer at war with Eurasia. We're actually at war with East Asia. And the posters against Eurasia are all still up. So how are the people going to reconcile the fact? Because they're told we've always been at war with East Asia. And they go, saboteurs put those posters up. Tear them down.
Russian agents.
Tear them down. And how many times in the last few years have we been through those ridiculous pivots where, only the vaccine can save us? Next day, no one ever said it stopped transmission of COVID. Joe Biden is just a nice old man with a stutter he's had since childhood. Oh, we always knew he was a Alzheimer's patient being hidden by, his family and various cunning, subordinates. We're going through that every day, that scene where we are suddenly expected to switch enemies. We've switched Elon Musk being the enemy 3 times in the last week, I think. About a week ago after his fight with Trump, I saw Democrats saying, we should court Elon. We should bring him into our movement, Now he's apologized and it'll again be, firebomb Teslas.
Colby, go ahead, pull it. Who was the guest, Colby? Can you tell us? Does it say in the YouTube drop-down description? We know the other guy's Tucker Carlson. Pretty sure we've heard of him.
It might be a writer or something, or like a
He's somebody who reads. What you reading for? Yeah, he elucidated everything,
What you
time
reading for?
1984. That's exactly right, Bill Hicks. He elucidated everything from 1984. I thought he did a pretty good summary because that's what goes on, and tied it back to COVID, tied it back to all these gaslighting claims, and then pointed out specifically Elon Musk. He goes from pole to pole. So I don't know what that's called when you swing like that. Buy something. Buy Tesla? No, that's not what it is called. But what age were you when you read 1984? When did you become aware of such things going on in fiction translating to reality?
Oh, geez. I mean, it's been, I mean, it was when I was in school, but it wasn't because of school. It was a long time ago. But it's it's such an interesting thing to see this develop over the years. And I've always pointed out the kind of the intersection between some of these, which again, I think we talked about this, but the different parts of this, like to talk about using it as a template, which is so perfect because it sure as hell starts to feel that way. Even more so, like we'll pluck the worst parts that were for them the best parts out of these different the novels and different, because it's not all just 1984. I mean, some of it is like the pharmaceutical kind of sedation, like the soma. like yeah, exactly. There's all these different elements.
Telescreens like Fahrenheit 451.
Right,
and
right,
people
right.
being more in touch with like the people on the screen. They're like, that's my family. I remember Montauk, like I remember reading it and then seeing the movie version of it. And I was like, this is crazy. Firemen setting fires. Like that's such a brilliant metaphor for how irrational.
And the book burning and
the
digital world we're in today. The thing that stood out to me though about what they're saying there, which is
the kindling, you mean? The kindling, the digital book burning? Kindle?
Oh, I was like, what's that from? Yeah, right. Exactly. I hate those digital. I can't do that. It just kills me. I read a lot. It drives me crazy. But the weirdness of watching them talk about that and watching we all, I mean, it's very transparent, that especially like kind of we were saying earlier, that it's on Tucker Carlson means literally everybody everywhere knows that that's something we're talking about. Right. And so that's usually an indication that that's, he is mainstream. I'm in my garage now and I'm this golly, like, it's like, I just don't buy it, man. I mean, you were half a step away from the corporate media, it's like the Megyn Kellys and, but what I always say though, I genuinely hope that he is, sees it, starts calling it out. I'll support it when he says something true. I hope so. Just like I hope Trump is what they think he is. I just don't believe it, But like the point is, you're sitting, you're laughing about these things, but you played a very, very serious role, if not still, in making those things happen that you're now laughing about as in reality, But either way, I think it's good that we're recognizing that. The question is, are we at a point where we can actually stop that? I believe so. I believe we can stop, most anything really. But the idea is that we're trapped in this kind of cycle where we're debating the things that are irrelevant to what they're building around us, which is such a weird thing to think about. And it's still being built. And as Tucker's pointing to it, it's almost like the more that they kind of highlight this nebulous thing, it just, I don't, but at the same time,
is it normalized?
What's that?
Are they washing away the sting of it by normalizing it?
Well, that's what I was going to say is that at one point, people are seeing it, which is like I was saying earlier, that's still a good thing. But it's kind of like, I'm torn between thinking that more people than ever are seeing, waking up, talking about these things versus, where there's like a coordinated sort of allowance of awareness to manipulate, but either way, I've been saying for a long time, it's very obvious. I mean, COVID-19 was an example, it stopped being partisan. And even though people still debate that, it was very clear when you look at the facts and it just shook people out of this matrix, the control structure, and then we saw, in Israel was a major event that very clearly shook people out of some very different, but very serious control structures, and now with the kind of Trump kind of breakdown, the MAGA thing, every other promise being broken or Maha, like it's hard not to feel like it's kind of a coordinated destruction, but it is shaking people to their core, at high levels. And so whether that's going to be utilized in a positive way or not is the real question. And that's what we're here to do. Be like, don't fall back in line. Don't just start picking the next person to follow. Stand there, acknowledge that you're being played, manipulated. We've all been there at one point, and start questioning every single thing that happens next. Start looking at action and, not statements, not narratives, not promises, but precedent, action, and outcome. That's it, especially in politics. That's what I just keep driving into people's minds.
So so it's kind of like in football where instead of like looking at their head, you would look at their chest so that they can't juke, right? This is instead of listening to their words, actually study their actions, and then you're not going to get fooled again.
Yeah, but more than just the actions, right? Like what they've their statements, right? The actions they take and the outcome, the precedent, or the precedent and the outcome. Meaning, just because someone promises something and they don't do it doesn't mean that they didn't mean to, right? But for me, it's less relevant right now. It's about finding people in these positions that are consistently following through what they say they're going to do, or at least demonstrating a path to try, and then over the process of 10 years being consistently, whether it just happens every time or not, majority of them are following through with what they claim they're trying to do. Massey today, whether he's being an opportunist and recognizing that's what people want and leaning into it, which I'm a pessimist and I'll doubt every government person, but I still see what he's doing as a positive thing. And I still raise it up and say Massey's like the only real America First principled person in Congress right now. But is he, just doing this to get people to follow him? We should always ask that. But I'm still going to support him as he does it and calls all these things out. And, it's making the rest of them look like cartoons right now. It really is.
Precedent, action, outcome. Tulsi, Bongino, Patel. Either any of those three. Explain the precedents that they said, the actions they've taken, and the outcomes that they've delivered. And now we can see kind of through the political veil.
Yeah, well, I mean, Gabbard's an obvious one, back to like the statements of, when she got in the scene, like even before the presidential run, and then sort of like challenged these things, but then fell in line with people like Clinton. But then when she ran, did the same kind of thing. They're all the worst people. They're all war supporters, then fell back in line and supported the person in the party. It's like, I don't care whether you think that's what adults do in the political field. That's stupid. That's no principle, right? That's ridiculous to me. Bongino and Kash Patel are drowning in it right now, right? I mean, you could take a lot of examples. I frankly don't have a very high opinion of any of them. I think they're the junior team right now for a lot of reasons, and that's why they're kind of drowning in their narratives and they don't know how to present themselves well. But the Epstein thing is the best example right now. I mean, Bongino a lot more, but I think, both of them, Cash more so leading up into this, they were on shows doing the rounds and all the files and have to do it. The Democrats are pedophiles and we're going to break it all down. And then coming in and going, there's no list, there's no suicide. I saw it and I know, just like that's crazy. Now, you could argue that they just did, recognize the difference. But then the question becomes, then what were they talking about that whole time? So, that would be the action. The actions in and of themselves, now looking at the reality of it, shows you that they were being dishonest, because either they were making those things up, saying something they didn't know to be true, or they knew they were lying at the time. I mean, it's hard, it's easy to see these things, but it's never about the one thing. It's about the long-term consistency of it. I don't know very many politicians, if any, that consistently show you that they follow through what they say they're going to do. But I think that's because, like we talked about, the worst people fall into this. They recognize they can get away with this. They recognize they can say whatever they want. They'll even stay in power. They'll become millionaires as long as they toe very certain lines, and I think they know that.
Precedent, action, outcome. Trump.
Donald Trump. Oh God. I mean, you can see, and it's more about like, just action. And then I'm saying like, they're the one and the same, precedent being like the things they do, what they said, and then the outcome, whether they follow through. But so Donald Trump, let's see. I mean, realistically, you could go 100 different things about, saying you're going to do this and then assassinating Soleimani under a guise of diplomacy in an airport. There's 1,000 examples you can show where you are not the peace president, for example, right? Where you state you're going to do this before the election and now you're bombing and continuing wars and arming Ukraine and Israel, or I'm going to, stand against. Well, I don't think Trump really explicitly personally stated in any context that he was going to fight the mRNA, which is important to think about, but he very clearly let that assumption be out there with RFK and the rest, and then, leaned into the mRNA platform, leaned into the self-amplifying COVID shots, still support these things. There's so many examples like that. You can even go back even further and look at Donald Trump's actions from before. Read his books. Listen to what he tells you who he is, about his religion, about what he believes in, about his political standing, and now he's something completely different. Maybe he changed, but if you look at the consistency like we're talking about, you can see that these people are just playing the game, and I think that's what ultimately matters. Far too many people want, a team leader like we're talking about. They want somebody who's going to beat the other side, make them pay and make them look stupid, than they do just actually want the things they're fighting for. But I don't believe it's the majority. That's why I still have, hope. I believe that most people in this country are just manipulated by partisan politics and genuinely want the things that Trump said he was going to do and hasn't done. And with Kennedy, same exact thing.
Do you think that ourselves and our colleagues do what we do so that we take the off ramp from the interstate to idiocracy? Because we can see it manifesting. It's like the consequences of what they're building now continue to just manifest ignorance and chaos. And maybe the system is created to do that. But now that we're noticing what the system's created to do, we have the option to like take that off ramp.
Well, I mean, as always in that kind of conversation, I will reference work like Derek Bros and the conversation of exit and build and, building, it's insane. Corbett the same, the idea of like peer-to-peer economies about, just free exchange of individuals. Like we don't, no government involved in all of it. It's like, that's the direction we should take. Like, or take a page out of Larkin Rose's book or just his, statements. I'm sure I haven't read all his books. I'm sure he says it in one of them, but the point being that, kind of just ignore them. Right? Like just, like he says, like if enough people just sit down and say, no, yeah, some of us will get beat up, but eventually their arms will get tired. Right. And it's like, the idea is like, they don't have that power if you don't necessarily give, I mean, obviously violence is there. They can come at you with force, but his point is the same. Like if everyone in this country just said, you know what, we don't care what you say anymore. We're done. Like that goes back to the point of 3.5%. They can't arrest everybody. They can't beat everybody up. They lose that power, right? So it's like that's kind of that mindset. And then if you're going to do that and stop giving them the power, well, might as well build something new. Build a new direction, a new civilization, if you will. And that's Derek's point in that is it taken out of context a lot. It's that it's not always like go move in the woods and build a cabin, right? It could be stay in the system that you're in and just start building new. Anything, everything, it's like, but it's any of those things. It's just stop giving them that power over your life and start finding new paths into the things you want. And but I'm very much of that mind. Let's move away from all this and build an entirely new civilization that doesn't, even involve any of that. That's why I love what he does in Mexico with and by the way, he has that coming up January 17th, I believe, the People's Reset. Make sure you check that out.
Yeah. And he's, Scott, when's he coming on the show? Soon?
We're going to have to do a pre-record. I've been going back and forth.
Right on.
Yeah.
Not a problem. We're doing pre-records now, everybody, because some people aren't awake when the show's going on. They got other things going on. All right. So, Ryan, going back to how they control everybody, it sounds difficult if you're under control, how to get out. But my observation would be most of the control is done through people's assumptions. You are participating in some aspect of society ignorantly. Let's say you're paying taxes, right? And you're doing so because you think that's how things work. But you don't realize those taxes are going to killing babies in Palestine or pedophiles on the Epstein list or all these other things, right? So because you've assumed and not questioned it, question everything, because you haven't questioned it, you're in this no-go realm where you're in like a limbo. But to get back to reality, learn the history and evolution of the institutions that you're supporting with your daily actions. And that's where you can start taking back your power. So in order to take back our power, a nebulous term, the specific action is to stop assuming. And to your phrase, question everything.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think assumption is one of the worst things, one of the most detrimental things happening in this field, and one of the things that are like driven, I mean, that's one of the most important things in the kind of partisan team sport politic manipulation, right? They need you to assume in the direction of whatever works for your team. And that's one of the things that I keep getting from people. People that I know, they're good people, have good intentions, but just somehow still think that, Trump is doing the right thing or, whatever, like just blinded by, at least as I see it. And you show them this, what's happening with Epstein is a very important one. And they go, I don't know, why would he do that? There must be a reason. It's like, okay, maybe, right? So what are you doing right now? Are you just putting that on pause until you can figure out what makes that feel like it's okay for your side? Well, let's acknowledge that it's crazy. That's not what he promised. That's supporting people that you would have told me. Like if Biden did that, you would have called him a pedophile. It's like, okay, so if Biden did that, would you go, well, there must be something. No. So you're making a conscious choice to go, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, even if I never find out why, because he probably has a logic behind it. It's like, God, I mean, that is, that's just, it's the worst thing. I don't want to be too disparaging. It's just problematic, because a lot of people, they believe in these people. They want to believe. And we all get why they want so desperately that we all want somebody to, show that to guide to take the right steps and do the right thing. We all want that. But we're so deprived and so starved of people with principles and integrity. When somebody just promises those things, people go crazy, RFK was a good play on that, in my opinion. Or, who knows whether he's being blackmailed or whatever, which honestly, that does seem to make the most sense, but I wouldn't assume that like any of the rest.
Well, I think another problem is like in this country, we as individuals are endowed with rights from God, but you only have rights so far as you can defend them. And as part of a civilized society, we then delegate rights to the police and the government to protect our rights, allegedly, because that's what government is there to do in our form of government. Now you can see how far away we are from the original form of government and our role, our rights, how we protect them, our delegation, and the chain of command that goes down as opposed to it going up to the president. And because they've inverted that whole power structure, and because people assume their way through every day, that power structure goes very regularly unchallenged.
Yep. Especially today. And that's the scary reality of one of the, I mean, if not the most, in living memory, in my experience, the most obvious constitutional crisis this country's ever been in, with the ICE illegal immigration discussion, which, I don't think anybody would argue from the legal perspective that legal immigrants shouldn't be deported. They should, obviously, but there's a process. There's legal realities. Everybody, including illegal aliens, have constitutional rights in this country. And it's crazy how many people still don't accept that and don't agree, even though you can prove it 17 different ways, and it's just an alarming reality to see that people would allow that to continue, right? But it's just, there's, like you said, there's too much assumption, there's too much team sports politics and team sport involved, and they were willing to let it pass because they think, like, really that comes down to the argument that Trump and their team are the good guys, so they're going to break these things, but in the interest of saving them. And again, that goes back to the assumption where it's like, well, I sure hope you're right. For me, it's like, if it's about the principle and everything we've talked about today, then if it's difficult, like, okay, let's say, we can't give them all a process because that would take too long. Well, so your argument is, because it's too difficult, we shouldn't do the right thing, or rather the inherent thing, the God-given thing. Not that government didn't give us rights. These are outlined inherent God-given rights, And so if your argument is we don't do that because it's too difficult, well, okay, the next time a Democrat comes into power, they're going to go, this is just going to take too long. We're just going to take your guns away. It's just so, it's the same logic. Or in the COVID-19 timeframe, what was the point ever made? Well, it's not like the Constitution says, asterisk, unless there's a pathogen. Well, no, that's the same point. It's just that they get, honestly, back to the earlier point, I don't think many conservatives are even falling for that anymore. I think a lot of them are, but not the majority. And I think the team sport kind of influencer screamers at the top are the ones that are like screaming the marching orders right now, and it's just not working anymore. That's the way I would read it, like to the end point right now. And that's what we're seeing kind of with this fraction, or the fracturing of the team, because they're just not stupid. I mean, these people are not dishonest. They want these good things, and there's a breaking point, right? And to them, they've been built really strongly around the idea of human trafficking, of pedophilia, of child abuse, which we all should obviously care about, but clearly from the conservative side. And to have him just come out and not just not do something, but come out and go, it's a fake, right? You're a weakling if you say that we should talk about this. I think, we talked about this, you and I, Charlie, in our last interview. It's like, I'm with you. That doesn't make any sense, but we shouldn't ignore it until we get the answer why, But my opinions. I think there's a lot of obvious points of influence there.
To your point about due process and immigration, what do you guys think about Alligator Alley, especially just the branding of Alligator Alcatraz?
Yeah.
The branding of it, like the whole just idea, it's like cartoonish. And it just seems below our standard as Americans, which is where we're at right now. We're like basement sub level 2. We got to get back up to the ground level. How would you envision such a process working without scare tactics and like cheesy 1970s marketing endeavors?
In regard to just deporting.
I mean, just like, creating a prison in the Everglades where they tell people no one lives, but there's a lot of indigenous tribes that still live down there. There's just like a layer upon layer of like ignorance, hypocrisy, gaslighting, and denigration of human beings, who many of whom like still have families here and might have come here without filing pay. Like there's a lot of nuance that involves real breathing human beings who, just because their skin color is a little different or their language is a little different, doesn't mean that they're not human beings with human rights.
Well, see, that's a point that often gets missed, even by, like, I can easily acknowledge from a legal perspective. Okay, if we're forced to live in a state of society and the law says that this person is illegal here and they're illegally here, then yeah, then they should be deported. That's the law, right? But the point, it's the fact that we pretend that the human element doesn't play a factor, that they're like, let's even get away from, like, let's just say the person just wanted to come here, right? Not running from anything, not fleeing anything, but came here, went through that and snuck in and then built a family, got a job, right? Whatever, and spent 20 years here. Okay, is he still illegal? Yes. But, there's a human element to that. And I'm not going to say that there's an easy answer to that, but it's like, at the very least, it shouldn't be something that you disregard, right? That there's people and families and lives and whatever. But all that aside, again, the legal reality is there. And so for me, it's about trying to come at this the right way. And to the point about the Alligator Alcatraz, like I wouldn't do it in the first place. That's crazy to me. Everything they're doing there let's be clear, that's not going to be temporary. That was clear from day one. And now he's already continuing to float the idea that this is going to become like the new prison infrastructure. It's insane to me. And I think it's about two things. It's about, the mass deportations of people largely who are not criminals and also here legally, which is happening, but also Americans, which is also happening. It's already happened, and not just naturalized. There's been actual citizens, and I just was going to talk about it today, but I'll do it tomorrow. I didn't get to do a show today of a U.S. citizen that was just arrested. It was coming back from May, but he's got a video of it. He's a U.S. citizen, and they arrested him because he's brown, and they literally said, "You don't have any rights. You're a migro." So they said it's on video, and I'm like, this is the way these ICE agents are acting. Anyway, I'm on a tirade there. My point though is that at the end of the day, what they're going after are largely people who are here who are not criminals, first and foremost. That's obvious. But okay, if they're here illegally, then that should matter in the context of the legal aspect. But the problem is right there, the majority of people that I can see, even from the very beginning, were here legally, but then secondarily were people who were in the process of getting here legally, which clearly matters. People are being told, come here. American dream, right? Follow this. You want to be a citizen? Go through the process. If you look at the numbers, a shocking amount of people who they've been deported are just people who were literally in the process of becoming citizens. So they didn't have anything, right? They came here under asylum, let's say, and the current administration doesn't care about that. Well, it is the law, right? So if you're the one telling me it matters they're here illegally, then that matters just as much. But the other part is people who come up and go, I want to be a citizen. Okay, well, come this way. Go through the process. Okay, so they go through it. They start, they hear for a while. It takes a long time, and unfortunately. And so they're going through it. And some people have been like showing up for their final meeting, like to get their citizenship, and ICE shows up and deports them. And they got a family, or I could go off forever about this. And it's just, again, the original.
No, but that's embarrassing because it's sold to the American people that they're getting rid of gang members and criminals that were released from prisons in other countries.
Yes. And in fact, what they did, which is also provable, is that they dropped the charges and released the leaders of MS-13 because Bukele has a deal with them. It's a public story. Or the fact that way before that, Bondi dropped the charges on one of the MS-13 members that they were just about to take this all the way and just dropped it and deported him. And it's like these people are working with Bukele, But on top of that, Garcia is a good example. Just so people aren't following this case because there's so much else going on, every judge so far at the highest level has come back and said this is absurd. He's not a gang member. The evidence does not show that. Like I was saying in the beginning, using the court documents, it doesn't. That's not to say he's not a criminal also. I don't know what his life is like, but the evidence they presented is not true. And then the trafficking story they pushed, that's actually blown up in their face. The courts have laughed at it. It doesn't make any sense. In fact, it proved itself to be false. And so what's crazy is they got a guy who's in prison who is a trafficker. He's actually a found guilty human trafficker, and he's been deported, I think, 5 or 6 times, I forget the number, and is in jail here. They used his testimony to try to put Garcia in jail for false allegations, and they let him out, and he's free for a year in the United States. So if you're a Republican out there, you tell me how that makes sense. And it's not just that one example. They're going after whoever they can for the wrong reasons and telling you it's all criminals, and people just don't want to look. And it's sad. And then last part, and unfortunately, I have to break off here. Donald Trump has said 6 times, I have everyone on video, 6 times that Americans could be next. And 2 of them, he makes it clear to say, I call them homegrown, like born here, so not naturalized. That's terrifying. Judge Napolitano is just like, more than once has ripped that apart and said, this is terrifying, right? This is, and it's coming. And I agree with him. I think that's where it's going. And it's not America first. And quite frankly, it's against American interest for something else.
First, they came for the illegal immigrants, and they came for the noticers. Let's hope not. Ryan, I want to thank you for taking time out. Charlie, Scott, do you guys have any questions for Ryan before we let him go?
No, I think that Alligator Alcatraz is a disgusting stain on America. Yet another disgusting stain.
It's like an Abu Ghraib type of thing.
Yeah. And the branding, the marketing component of it is gross. Everything about it is just not what America used to be about. Not that we celebrate that we have 25% of the world's prisoners and that we have merch. It's just a bad. It's on brand for the administration, of course, but it's disgusting from anybody that's got any sort of perspective on it. It just seems very cheap. So I wish this would go away, and these people need to really think a couple steps ahead. You know, they talk about 5-dimensional chess, but are you just thinking 2 steps away? Let's think conspiracy hopscotch, right? Like, you do understand these places can be used for people like you, right? It just depends. I mean, they deem you a domestic terrorist operating on the homeland, on the battlefield in the homeland, you know, and next thing you know, you have no right. So you could be disappeared here in the United States, where we are right now. So this is a slippery slope, and I think these Trump people need to be very cautious about how enthusiastic they are for the privatizing of prisons and the marketing of it, because it's all fun and games until they're being thrown in there by the Gavin Newsom presidency administration.
Right.
I was just gonna say that 444 Apotheosis in the chat says, Ryan, you should stick around and watch another 5 hours of clips with us. Thank you so much for sticking around, for coming on, dude. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation, guys. I mean, it's funny that I made sure to wanted to join you guys and have the conversation, but it's definitely late for me. It's funny how old I feel these days when it's like, what's funny is I'll do a show and it'll go late, and then because the show started at like 4 p.m., it doesn't feel the same. But if I'm like not doing work, I get tired at like 4 p.m. It's just bad these days. But thanks for the conversation, guys. I really enjoyed it, and let's do it again.
All right, you can learn more about Ryan's work. You can keep up with his articles, his report, thelastamericanvagabond.com, or if you're over there on the Twitter, which the kids call the X these days, it's TLA Vagabond, TLA Vagabond, T-Lav with Agabond at the end. Anyway, The Last American Vagabond, Ryan Cristian. Ryan, thank you so much for carving out a little time, even though you'd probably like to be resting right now. I think the elucidations are edifying for the audience. So thank you.
Well, thank you, guys. And I'll see you next time. Have a good one.
Right, see you soon, man. Peace. I've dealt with a variety of fears over the years by facilitating a growth mindset and an anti-fragile mentality. I've learned from mistakes that you haven't even conceived of yet. Now, I can't do it for you, but I can share the resources, the methods, the tools, and inspiration for you to learn how to do it for yourself. And it really is worth learning how to do for yourself, because it's a lifelong beneficial skill. It's evergreen. It's never going to tarnish. You're always going to use this. If you're interested in learning more, I host a podcast every Sunday night. We analyze the week's news and help you have non-contradictory views you actually understand, but you've got to come along for the ride and process the news with us so you have that understanding. I also teach adults twice a year in a 12-week course called Autonomy that is aimed at resolving all the problems I just pointed out with the school system and the irrational fears and the replacement of the rites of passage and the methods you need to have a skeleton key in life and a Swiss Army knife, so you can have the tools and the access to do whatever you need to do in this world to bring your goals, to bring your dreams and map them to a truthful reality. It is a simple process, but it is not for those who cling to their irrational fears. So I hope if we have lowered the barrier to entry today, if you see a future you that is more realistic and in detail and something you want to strive toward, I recommend you go to getautonomy.info. Check out the offer as far as what we do for people. I want you to know it applies to you. You can learn it. I can teach it. So I want to thank you all for your time and attention. Peace. Who's going to be first off the mute this morning?
I'm glad that I have this course now more than ever. Having a community of people to discuss how to be empowered and autonomous is really necessary and also therapeutic. I'm this much scared about the virus and a lot scared of what's coming down the pipe as a result.
All right, so first off, we're going to get you away from that fear and that stress that I'm sensing. And I want to get you into the practicality of exercising the conversations you're going to need to have.
Have you found that your skills aren't matching up with the challenges ahead? Here are 19 essential skills for success that school never taught you. Get your free copy by following the link below or visit getautonomy.info/19skills.